Okay. Someone just had a message said that can you, if your speakers are out, can you dial in and listen and still see? And the answer is yes, that's actually true. Well, welcome everyone. Tonight we are doing a webinar on the herbs of Christmas, and we're just going to have a little bit of fun and acquaint you with some of the plants you probably heard of, familiar with, in songs and holidays, and talk a little bit about their tradition uses. So let's get started. Because here are the herbs we're going to be covering tonight. Frankincense, myrrh, mistletoe, holly, ivy, pine, vanilla, cinnamon, and chocolate. So let's start with the two that were gifts of the Magi to the wise men. And Thomas, is there one of these that you'd prefer to be the lead person on, or do you?
No, I'll let you take the lead on these.
Okay, so let's start, first of all, talk about frankincense. Now, this is some picture of some frankincense tears. I've actually purchased frankincense tears, and they're a resin, and actually so is myrrh. The same as pine gum is a resin. It's basically an exudate from the sap of the tree that hardens, and it's highly flammable, so it's been used as an incense. In fact, you go back and you look at the recipe for the incense that was burned in the temple in the Old Testament. It was one of the main ingredients was frankincense, so it's been burned as a kind of to purify the environment and so forth. There are actually a number of different species of trees that have been used as frankincense, and they're all Boswellia. The genus Boswellia. So there's a number of, the most common use for frankincense today is actually as an essential oil. The gum is not really water soluble. If you take and drop pine gum into your teapot and try to dissolve it, it's not going to dissolve very well. They're highly dissolvable in alcohol, and they can also be distilled to create essential oils. In fact, resin is actually an oxidized essential oil that has basically hardened, and so it can be actually converted back into an aromatic substances through the process of being extracted as an essential oil. So frankincense essential oil is anti-cancerous. It's an antidepressant. It lifts your mood and lifts your spirits. It's antiseptic, so it helps kill bacteria and fight infection. It's anti-inflammatory, and probably one of its best uses is as a respiratory remedy. Frankincense really works on the thymus and the lungs and the whole upper respiratory immune response to strengthen the lungs, relieving cough. It's been used for pneumonia, tuberculosis. I know that Kimberly Ballas recommends for lumps in the breast and tumors that you rub frankincense oil in them, and that could be really helpful there. It stimulates the immune response, helps to fight infection. It's also, however, a little bit of a sedative, so it also helps to control high blood pressure. I've used it in my emotional healing for people who have self-esteem issues. Because what it does is it helps to boost your defenses emotionally, which has to do with your sense of self-worth or self-respect, as well as physically. And there's some research to indicate that the essential oil of frankincense stimulates blood flow into the pineal and pituitary, and so it's one of the fragrances that's been used to help induce greater spiritual awareness. So that's an interesting use, considering its association with the season of Christmas and as a gift of the three wise men. One of the species of frankincense is actually Boswellia, and I'm sure many of you have heard of Boswellia. This is a picture of some bark that I got from the Wikipedia. Boswellia is actually become quite well known as an anti-inflammatory. It's been traditionally used to help arthritis, including rheumatoid arthritis, It seems to have an effect of balancing the immune system as well as reducing inflammation, so it's been used in autoimmune disorders. It's antiseptic and astringent, and I happen to really think it's a fabulous anti-inflammatory herb. A lot of good research on it. It's also been used for cancer. So this is a little bit of a great herb. Thomas, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
There's a couple of people who are saying they can't hear, so I guess I'm not sure what the problem is. Sometimes the webinar system does it. Someone just asked a question, to use frankincense as an oil, would you put it in a diffuser? Yeah, that's one way to use it. You can also actually just a little trick I learned when I took my first aromatherapy course, and I took my first aromatherapy course back in 1990, was to actually, you can use essential oils almost like anointing a person. There are several spots that are really good places to put them on the body. One of them is the pulse points on the wrist. Another one is just under the ear where people put perfume. And frankincense is one of the ones that I've also put over the middle of the forehead, what's called the third eye, to help induce greater awareness. Like when I've been doing emotional healing work, amber, which is another resin, and frankincense are two of the oils I would sometimes use when a person was having trouble seeing things clearly. I would just simply put a drop over their forehead, and it would seem to help them penetrate and get greater insights into what was going on with them. Of course, it's been burned, like as I mentioned, as incense, and it doesn't actually have to be made into incense. You can actually take and light little resinous tears, like this photo from Wikipedia shows, and they will burn. Now, Johns Hopkins University and the Hebrew University of Jerusalem determined that the smoke of frankincense actually is a psychoactive drug. That, in other words, actually has an effect on the brain to actually relieve depression and reduce anxiety. So that's kind of interesting that the fragrance of that would, lift your spirit and reduce your stress and tension and put you probably in a better state of mood to worship or be receptive to things. Someone's just, I just have to send a note to someone who's having a problem getting on. Because someone's having access code that doesn't work, and that's GoToWebinar sends out the access code, so I'm not sure what the problem is, unless the access code was shared with someone else. So anyway, myrrh is another plant, and I've actually used myrrh a lot more than I've used frankincense. In fact, again, I used to buy myrrh in this form that you see right here. Again, it's a resin, so it's got this little pellets and so forth. Yeah. So someone said, so boswellia is actually frankincense. Boswellia is a tree in the same genus as frankincense, and so it could be considered one of the plants that has properties like frankincense. So there's a whole bunch of different trees in that genus that have been used as frankincense. So although I think in boswellia they may actually use the bark and rather than the gum. This is also native to Africa, and this one is actually closely related to Google. Some of you have heard of Google, which is used in Ayurvedic medicine, and Google is simply a different species of myrrh. This one is actually used in a lot of modern Christian rituals, like in, I believe it's used in incense that's burned in Catholic things. So next we have myrrh, as the properties of myrrh include the fact that it's a stimulant, it's antiseptic, it's also anti-inflammatory like frankincense, and expectorant. But myrrh is, in my opinion, a little more oriented towards the digestive tract than to the respiratory system like frankincense. Myrrh has often been used in digestive tonics. It's been used to fight gastrointestinal infections. It stimulates appetite. And I also find it's a really, really good disinfectant. I've used myrrh as part of a recipe for a gargle for sore throats. I make equal parts myrrh, bayberry, and golden seal, and then add a little bit of cayenne to that, about 1/4 the amount of cayenne of the other 3 herbs. Extract that out, and man, that really fights infection, knocks out sore throats. You can also apply this stuff topically. So myrrh is, again, used primarily in modern times as an essential oil. And again, the essential oil has the similar properties: anti-inflammatory, antiseptic, a little bit astringent, somewhat bitter. It stimulates appetite. It's been applied to disinfect things like canker sores. It's used for coughs, infections. Myrrh is also really good at healing ulcerations, particularly ulcerations on the skin. You'll sometimes get things like bed sores or sores in elderly people. And both myrrh and golden seal are really, really good at healing those kinds of topical wounds and sores. Someone asked me to repeat the sore throat remedy. It's equal parts bayberry root bark, which is an astringent that cuts mucus, golden seal, which is a bitter that's also astringent and disinfectant, and then myrrh. And then you put those 3 in equal parts, and then use about 1/4 of a part of cayenne pepper. Now, since the myrrh does not extract well in water, I usually actually make that as glycerite, meaning that you mix glycerin and water 50-50, and then you simmer those herbs for 20 minutes on the stove to make what would be almost like a decoction, and then you take that and dilute a little of that in warm water to use as gargle, and it's a fantastic gargle. It cuts the mucus so that any mucus that's like dripping down the back of your throat is immediately loosened, so it sloughs off and can be expelled. It stings when you first gargle with it, but in 30 seconds it numbs and takes away the pain, and then it also just basically helps the throat.
I think that myrrh really does have an amazing affinity to the mouth. I make up a mouthwash, and I use alcohol tincture of myrrh and white oak bark mixed with glycerin to sweeten it up, and a little bit of peppermint essential oil. And it does wonders for any type of mouth sore, ulceration in the mouth, and really, really nice as a mouthwash that way.
Yeah, actually, myrrh is used a lot in actual mouthwashes and mouth preparations in medicine. I mean, because it actually is really good and well documented to help things with the mouth and mucous membranes. So it's a good herb for both the skin and the mucous membranes. Can you extract the medicinal properties of bayberry and golden seal by decoction? Yes, actually you said concoction, but it's decoction. A decoction is different than a tea. In a tea, you pour boiling water over the herb and let it steep for a certain amount of time. When you make a decoction, you actually bring the herb to a boil, bring the liquid that you're extracting in to a boil, turn the liquid down to simmer, toss the herbs in, and let them simmer for 15 to 20 minutes. And I like to go one better with this. If you use 50% glycerin and 50% purified water, put that in there and simmer it in there for 20 minutes. Some of the water will evaporate, which will give a higher content of glycerin, and then you can make a great little remedy that way. It's bayberry is B-A-Y-B-E-R-R-Y. It's a It's the bayberry root bark is the part that's used. And someone asked, so would myrrh mix well with golden salve to apply to sores? Yeah, actually, you could mix myrrh essential oil in with a salve, like a golden salve, and apply it topically to sores, and it would be very, very healing to that sort of thing.
I also use myrrh instead of golden seal when I'm making up antiseptic salve. Myrrh is a nice, cheap alternative to the fairly expensive golden seal to mix in with your comfrey and calendula and make an all-purpose antiseptic healing salve.
Yeah, I think myrrh actually is in many cases a better remedy to use for many of the applications that golden seal is used for. I think myrrh is a better infection fighter than golden seal, and golden seal, as you mentioned, is very expensive and somewhat endangered. Someone asked you to repeat the remedy for the mouthwash with the peppermint oil. So
I mix half and half tinctures of myrrh and white oak bark with glycerin and a little bit of peppermint essential oil. And you're not going to get it wrong. Just kind of play around with how you like it to taste. Some people will like more peppermint, some people will like less, some people need more glycerin to make it sweeter, but all of those are going to act as preservatives, so it'll last for a while.
Oh, someone asked about using I don't remember whether it's myrrh, whether they were, because this question was asking about frankincense or myrrh can both be used neat, meaning that they can be applied topically directly to the skin, and they will not have like an irritating effect. Now Google, see here's Google, see it's very much like myrrh, your resin coming from a different species of the tree, and it's been shown to help lower cholesterol, lower LDL and raise HDL, decrease the stickiness of blood platelets to reduce blood clotting, and it also helps the thyroid absorb iodine and has been shown to actually aid weight loss. It's very likely that myrrh would have some similar properties in terms of stimulating the metabolism, in terms of helping the body burn fat. I don't see why there may not be some crossover in those plants. That's theoretical, but it's very possible. And someone asked, would myrrh then be good for severe acne with cysts? Possibly.
Why not?
Possibly, yeah. I think that it could probably have some very good application for that. Okay, so we finished our Gift of the Magi. Now we're going to go to the evergreens. One of the interesting things about the Christmas time, of course, is that it's in the middle of winter, and tonight is the winter solstice, the longest day of the year. In fact, the reason why Christmas is celebrated on the 25th is because actually it is links back to very, very old traditions celebrating the passing of the winter solstice. You see, at this point, the ancients understood the seasons in terms of how the sun rose and set on the landscape. So basically, the rising of the sun, the place where the sun rises moves farther and farther south, making the day shorter and shorter until you hit the 21st. Okay, and then on the 21st, it goes as far south as it's going to go, and it appears to just the naked eye that the sun stops there for 3 days. Okay, so for 3 days, the sun is at the lowest point, the day is at the shortest, and then on December 25th, you notice the sun starting to creep back to the north, meaning that the time of the darkness, when darkness has basically gained ascendancy over light, has passed, and now we celebrate the fact that light is returning to the earth. Okay, so that's basically the pagan or just actually that passing is celebrated the world over in almost every single culture. So it makes sense that Christmas became associated in our country and as a Christian nation as a celebration of that same event. Anyway, so evergreens, which are plants that manage to stay green all winter long, were often pulled inside and used to decorate people's homes to give them some of the green of summertime at this very dark time of the year. One of these is mistletoe. And all of us have heard the story of the kissing under the mistletoe. And this comes from the traditions of the Norse, because mistletoe was the plant of the Norse god of love, which is why the kissing became traditional. So we all know the custom that you're supposed to kiss somebody if you catch them under the mistletoe. It's also interesting that according to custom, though, after you cut mistletoe, it is not supposed to touch the ground between the time of its cutting and the last day of the celebration of Christmas. So now mistletoe is a really interesting medicinal plant, and it's a parasitic plant. And Thomas, why don't you tell us a little bit about mistletoe? Because I know you did some research on this one.
Yeah. And mistletoe is a really great remedy. After researching, I'm probably going to use it more frequently than I did before. I use it 8 or 10 times a year normally now, but it really has a lot broader use than I realized before doing this in-depth research. So European mistletoe is what's commonly used in herbal medicine, and that's Viscum album. And its effects are typically more mild than American mistletoe. In fact, quite different than American mistletoe, which is in a totally different genus. Both varieties are poisonous in higher doses. You find this in the literature as happening most often when children decide to eat the berries, and eating a large amount of the berries tends to cause seizures in children and can cause death as well. So it's a very strong plant, not to be used lightly, but it does have a really broad area of use. Next slide, Stephen.
Yep. This is some general uses for mistletoe. Do you want me to cover this, and then we'll go to the stuff you found about the difference between the two?
Sure.
Okay, so basically, the primary action of mistletoe is it's a nervine, an antispasmodic. It relaxes the nervous system, has a sedative effect, and also acts as a vasodilator, which means it lowers blood pressure and heart rate, and also relieves anxiety and panic. So this is a stress reliever. Actually, it helps promote sleep, and there's some stuff in here that Thomas will cover a little bit about its traditional use for treating epilepsy, and it's also been used for treating tinnitus, and there is also some research that found some anti-cancer compounds in this plant, and its extracts of this plant are actually used in Europe to treat cancer. I might mention that I'd like to mention that my ex-wife developed Graves' disease with tachycardia and blood pressure that skyrocketed, and she's also on epinephrine inhalers, which is kind of contradicted. And she went to the doctor, and he gave her a drug to control the heart rate and blood pressure, and she said, asked specifically, will this, have problems with my asthma medication? And the doctor said no, and then she looked it up online, and it did. Well, I was alarmed when her heart rate goes to 240 and her blood pressure skyrockets at the same time. So I was looking for a plant to help bring down her heart rate and bring down her blood pressure, and actually wound up using motherwort, which is very good for Graves' disease, and mistletoe. And I was really impressed with how well mistletoe worked. I had kind of been a little bit nervous about using it before because I knew it was a very strong botanical, but in this case I felt I had nothing to lose, and I thought it worked really well and seemed to me to be quite safe in the therapeutic doses. So I'm really pleased with the plant, and I'm going to actually use it more too. Go ahead, Thomas, and you tell them a little about the difference between them.
So European mistletoe traditionally has been used as a nervine, like Stephen mentioned, and it is vasodilative, so it relaxes not only your body but your blood vessels and lowers your blood pressure. It was used for convulsions and delirium, anything where they thought that the nervous system was really overstimulated, which could cause hysteria or delirium, any strong nervous system symptom that they saw, they used European mistletoe in either tea or tincture form. And so this weakened nervous state is typically what it was used for. And go to the next slide, Stephen.
Yes, it's coming.
The older work that we find for mistletoe dates back to about 1682, and it was a specific remedy for what they called Saint Vitus's dance, which we now call epilepsy. And when the nervous system, or actually the neurons in the brain, fire uncontrollably, it created a jerking motion that debilitated a lot of people, and they found that the mistletoe was able to calm the nerve firings in the brain and build the power of the nervous system. And they found that it was specific for not grand mal seizures, but petit mal seizures, or petit mal epilepsy. So the history goes back a really long ways. Now, more recently, there was a doctor in Germany that noticed that mistletoe, being a parasitic plant, acted really similar or looked like cancer in the body. Anywhere mistletoe grows out and puts off stems, and those stems touch the bark of trees, it attaches little roots into the bark and draws nutrients and puts out more stems. And so it's very much like the metastasis of cancer. So he started using an extract of mistletoe, and we don't know exactly how he extracted it or what parts he extracted, what his medium was for extraction, but it's sold under the trade name of Iscador, and became popular when Suzanne Summers decided to use Iscador in combination with, I believe it was a hyperthermia, instead of chemotherapy, following up surgery for breast cancer. So it's used all over Europe now for various cancers, including cancers of the cervix and ovaries, breast, stomach, colon, and lungs, and as a treatment for leukemia, sarcoma, and lymphoma. It's typically not used by itself. It is the immune stimulating component of kind of alternative European phytomedicine.
And this I mentioned is not just like the mistletoe tincture that I've got, but it's actually a specialized extract, right? That's apparently concentrating certain compounds. So, okay, give us a little about it.
Yeah, I do think that mistletoe as a tincture does have an effect on the immune system. I just don't think it's quite as profound as the way that he extracts it. So the specific indications for European mistletoe are arterial hypertension causing high blood pressure, vasoconstrictive headaches, so when your head feels like it's in a vice and it's being squeezed really tightly, and that causes headaches and even migraines, and petit mal seizures and ringing in the ears. It can be mixed with small amounts of other nervines to kind of amplify the potency and also decrease the dosage needed for the mistletoe, because it is, like I said, one of those toxic botanicals. So you typically want to take smaller doses, no more than 20 to 40 drops 3 times a day. It mixes really well with your other typical nervines like hops and passion flower and valerian. It actually mixes really well with Siberian ginseng root, or L-Ruthro, as well. Mixing about 5% of L-Ruthro with mistletoe amplifies the effects. Really nice.
And of course, then I mixed it with motherwort for the blood pressure and heart rate. So, and that's actually a good way to use these, is that if you mix a botanical that's more toxic with a botanical that's non-toxic, then you're kind of they're getting a dose that's not going to hurt them, when they're taking a bigger dose of the remedy. So,
and it's not to be used with prescription blood pressure medication. Oops. Because it can cause a lowering of the blood pressure too much when used that, but it is really effective using it by itself. In fact, there's a company that makes a commercial formula that has a little bit of mistletoe in it combined with hawthorn and motherwort, and it works really well. I have a client right now that is 23, 24 and has a congenital high blood pressure. His father was diagnosed at 19, his grandfather was diagnosed at 20. He's just been diagnosed and wanted to go the natural route. And, you know, he has no major health problems, but his blood pressure was running 180 over 110. And in less than a month, after adjusting his dose a couple of times with the European mistletoe and hawthorn and motherwort, we were able to get his blood pressure down to 130 over 70, which is just right. Now, the American mistletoe is a lot different than European mistletoe. It's a totally different plant, and actually figuring all of this out was a bit of a pain. American mistletoe was classified in the same genus as European mistletoe 100 years ago when the eclectics were using it, and it's changed names several times, and so researching all of this was pretty interesting. But the eclectics used American mistletoe in very small doses. You know, 1 to 30 drops was their dosage, and it typically was in the 1 to 5 drop dose range. So when you have a flushed face, a sudden rush of blood to the brain causing probably a vasodilative headaches, reoccurring headaches normally caused by high blood pressure, sudden attacks of tearing or rheumatic pains, weak or irregular heart action with swelling of the heart. Felters says that American mistletoe is a really good remedy for that, and it's one that I am going to play around with a little bit. It seems like not only the dose but the way it's administered makes a big difference on it. When it's administered through IV, it's a very strong vasoconstrictive agent, but when it's administered orally, it tends to have a different effect. So don't go outside and, pick what we commonly in the South at least call mistletoe, because it's not true European mistletoe. It has different uses and is a bit more poisonous. So stick with the European mistletoe, and I think that the effects are a lot more mild and easier to control.
There's a number of people who have asked some questions, and I'm going to actually try to answer some of these questions at the end, but I don't want to spend too much time trying to answer questions right now. Someone wanted to see the dose again for the European mistletoe, which is 20-40 drops 3 times a day. And mistletoe is available from a couple of Thomas, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. The mistletoe is available from a couple of manufacturers, but it's only available to professional herbalists. So, of course, one of the whole things to tell you about then is Thomas and I are wanting to put together a program to train people to be professional herbalists. But if you're interested in getting it, you could contact either one of us, because we both use it and could help.
And
get
the one commercially available formula for the heart specifically that has mistletoe, motherwort, and hawthorn in it is available for the public by Herbalist Alchemist. And what's it called? I think it's called Cardio Compound, but you'll just have to look at the Herbalist Alchemist formulas for the heart, and they have one that includes mistletoe that works really well.
Yeah. So holly, okay, well, the holly and the ivy, when they are both full grown. Okay, you know the song. So we're going to talk about holly and ivy. These are not major herbs, but these were used often to decorate homes, like you mentioned, during the winter solstice. And many of these were considered to be magical plants. So used in spells against witchcraft, or in other words, to ward off evil. So holly has been traditionally associated with Christmas and festivals around the time of Christmas. In the Christian mysticism, the since holly is a plant that's thorny, it represents like the crown of thorns of Christ. And it basically, again, has this traditional use in terms of being an evergreen to decorate the home in the winter. Now, holly, I've never used holly, but I'm really, after looking at this, I'm very interested. You know, the leaves are astringent. It's supposed to be a pretty good diuretic and diaphoretic, and also something to be used for persistent cough, asthma, and bronchitis. The berries, Thomas, do you say they don't contain caffeine? They contain theobromine?
Yeah, they contain theobromine instead of caffeine.
They're mildly toxic, and they can, I guess in large doses, they can be emetic and purgative. They were used as a laxative, but some species actually have been used to create a little bit of a stimulating beverage. Holly is used homeopathically for eye diseases, inflammation of the eye, pain in the spleen, diarrhea and catarrh, but my biggest use of holly is as a flower essence. Holly is one of the original 38 Bach flower remedies, and it is basically for people who feel cut off from love, which causes them to become jealous, envious, suspicious of others. And what it does is it's a remedy that opens the heart to be able to receive love, to feel compassion for other people, and express gratitude. What a wonderful Christmas plant, right? And what a wonderful Christmas flower essence. And the whole idea of Christmas is to open one's heart to compassion and to love for others and to be grateful. So I think that's a beautiful plant for Christmas. Don't you?
Yeah, that's cool. I have holly outside, and I've not used it as a medicine yet, so I'm going to tincture some up and see how it works.
Okay. Someone just asked me to show the holly homeopathic again. There it is again. The biggest indication for holly homeopathic is diseases of the eye, which is like conjunctivitis and eye inflammation. The others are lesser uses for the homeopathic. Now, English ivy is one I've heard of again, and I haven't used too much, but its leaves and berries have been used again as an expectorant. And it's interesting, these plants, a lot of them, you know, the wintertime colds and wintertime flus, coughs and bronchitis. This one is a toxic botanical for professional use only. And so I only put one slide in it because there's not a lot to say about it. And move on to something that's a little funner, which is pine. Pine is one of a number of trees people cut at Christmas time to decorate. And I'm going to just give you a little botany lesson right here. Pine trees have needles that grow in bundles. So if you look at an evergreen tree and you see that the needles are in little bundles, like this particular one, where there's 2 or 3 or sometimes more needles coming out of one little spot on the branch. They're generally longer, and then they have these kind of pine cones. That's a pine tree. Now, a lot of Christmas trees are spruce and fir trees. Now, these are actually 2 species of trees that actually grow here in Utah. I picked them deliberately. One is the Colorado blue spruce, which you can see has kind of a little bit of a bluish cast to the needles, and see the difference in the cone. And then you also have the fir, and this is the white fir, which is also grows here in Utah where I live. These plants actually have a lot of similar uses to what we're going to talk about with pine, but spruce and firs have singular needles, so you can see the needles aren't in bunches. And the spruce trees, the needles are rounded and they stick straight out, so if you like kind of grab the stem, they'll poke you. They tend to be a much sharper. Whereas fir trees, I remember fir because it's like you can pet them. You can't pet a spruce tree because it'll poke you, but you can pet a fir tree because the needles are flat and they're not as sharp, and so they don't poke you as much. Now, one of my favorite uses of pine is the pine bark as a decongestant and expectorant. And I have to say that white pine bark is one of my favorite remedies for the lungs. It loosens mucus. It helps the body expel mucus. It's antiseptic and disinfectant to help fight infections. It helps to relieve coughs. And I typically I've made a number of formulas using white pine and wild cherry as the two principal herbs in the formula. And I really believe that the reason why there used to be so many cherry-flavored cough syrups is because at one time a lot of cough syrups were made with wild cherry bark. So those two together seem to make a great formula. White pine is also a principal ingredient in one of my old standby remedies, composition powder, which is the bayberry root bark, white pine, and then cayenne, ginger, and cloves, which was used to relieve catarrh and congestion and mucus and to break up colds and fevers and that sort of thing. So it's a great, great remedy. But pine is also one of nature's really, really versatile remedies. Pine is another one of the Bach flower remedies. And here's another good thing that you can see a nice association with Christmas. It's used for people who feel guilty, who are very critical of themselves, blaming of themselves, have a hard time accepting themselves. It helps a person find self-acceptance, to self-forgiveness, and to free one from inappropriate guilt and blame. So a great remedy for people who catarrh is mucus. Excessive mucus is what catarrh is. And then the essential oil of pine is very invigorating. Again, a good scent for the lungs, helpful for lung infections and asthma, and is also a good remedy for the flu. And here are some other uses for pine. Pine is one of the plants that in the survival books I've read by Tom Brown. He lists pine, cattails, and a couple other herb plants as being your wilderness supermarket plants. And pine needles, of course, are a source of food. The needles were traditionally drunk as a tea in the middle of winter by Native Americans and other people to prevent colds. And part of the reason for that is that pine needles are actually high in vitamin C, and so it was one of the few wintertime sources of vitamin C that people could have in the winter. The pollen is interesting because the pollen actually contains testosterone and androgens and basically boosts testosterone levels in men. And it could, I've spelled that wrong. It should be a flower as in like F-L-O-U-R, flour, like mixing with flour like you used to make bread. I've been out in the spring when you can hit the trees and you'll see like the pollen falling down. What you do is you can hold up a sack and just tap the trees and let the pollen fall into a sack, and you could collect the pollen that way. And people use cattail pollen and pine pollen, and you mix it half and half with flour to make the flour last longer. You know, when you're running out of flour in the spring from previous harvests is the way that worked. But it boosts testosterone levels. And another thing, the pine, years ago, this lady taught me about collecting some of the resin of the pine tree, the pine gum, which is like the myrrh and the Google and the frankincense we saw earlier. And she actually would take a little bit of it and warm it up with a hairdryer and apply it topically to dry out slivers. And it basically is a very, very good remedy for drawing out pus. Matthew Wood even talks about drawing out bullet fragments, I think, with this plant, making it have some properties in common with plantain, which is another drawing plant. Again, it's not a water-soluble remedy, so if you wanted to dissolve it, you'd have to dissolve it in alcohol in order to turn it into something that you could put as a compress or so forth. Turpentine is actually made from pine gum, and not the turpentine they sell in paint stores, but basically the turpentine that was more like the modern pine essential oil was used a lot by Jethro Kloss and other people as a remedy for skin infections and other problems like that. So very, very interesting thing.
I've got one more for you on pine.
Oh, okay.
In the South, it's a typical remedy to shave the bark off, and in between the bark and the wood is a white layer of outer bark, and that is peeled off and applied directly to, or you can tincture it, and it is an amazing anti-inflammatory and almost as specific for arthritis from overuse, overwork, and one of the best remedies I've seen.
Cool. I don't remember right off the top of my head all of the plants that Tom Brown lists as like your wilderness supermarket, but I know one of the other ones is cattails, which is a big, the amount of things you can do with cattails are amazing. Okay, now we're going to finish up our webinar here and then hopefully have some time for some questions and answers by talking about some of the spices that we use at Christmas time, and we'll start with vanilla. Vanilla is derived from bean pods, and you can see the bean pods here that are actually grow from orchids, and they're native to Mexico, and the people in Mexico cultivated them, and they have to be dried in this and cured in this very peculiar way. So it's amazing that someone even could figure out how to do this. But when the Aztecs conquered the people in Mexico, they fell in love with the vanilla bean and vanilla, and they also used chocolate, one of the other ones we're going to talk about. So the chocolate and vanilla came out of Central and South America in its history. Now, when vanilla first came out, it was considered to be a medicine. Now, I haven't used vanilla a lot as a medicine, except in one instance that someone taught me a long time ago, that if you have real vanilla extract in your kitchen, it is a great remedy for burns. It actually numbs the pain, promotes healing. It's fantastic. So whenever I burn myself anymore, it's one of the fastest acting burn remedies I've ever tried. I just splash some real vanilla extract on the burn, and it's amazing. But in the old literature, vanilla was considered to be an aphrodisiac. And there is some possibility that there could be a little bit of substantiation to that, because vanilla has been shown to increase levels of catecholamines, which are certain neurotransmitters like epinephrine, dopamine, adrenaline, which stimulate you, okay, which help, lift you up. Dopamine is definitely a catecholamine, and one of the ones that is responsible for sexual arousal. There's even some evidence that vanilla could be slightly addictive because of that. We probably never use it in big enough quantities to make it be addictive, although we certainly like the flavor of it. And it has been used to reduce fevers and digestive effects. The bean pods you saw earlier, I have a few of those, and I made last 2 years I've made a cream pie, a banana cream pie, using real vanilla bean. And I have to tell you, the flavor, if you get a real vanilla bean, they're expensive as can be, but if you cook with a real vanilla bean, the flavor of the real vanilla will blow you away. It is totally 10 times better than vanilla extract. It's just absolutely wonderful. Have you ever tried that, Thomas?
Yeah, actually, Sarah made almond milk every 2 or 3 days and used real vanilla bean in almond milk, and it was amazing.
You can't. You could see how it could be considered an aphrodisiac, can't you? Like it really is just like has a wonderful mood enhancing effect when you use the actual vanilla bean.
And to give you a little bit more history behind vanilla, it took probably 350 years after the discovery of vanilla before they were able to cultivate it outside of Central and South America, because there's only one specific variety of bee in Central and South America that will pollinate the vanilla plant. And 350 years after it became popular in Europe, a 12-year-old boy finally figured out how to hand pollinate vanilla, and it then spread to other places, but it's still to this day hand pollinated and very labor intensive, which is why it's so expensive unless you go to Mexico and buy a big bundle of it, and there you can get it cheap because it's still pollinated by bees.
That's cool. For those of you who are asking, the webinar is going to be recorded and available for replay. So, and I will, just when I post it, send out an email to let everybody know that it's available. So if you have to leave early, then that's okay. Thomas, how about you take over a little bit here with the cinnamon?
Okay, so cinnamon is a common spice, but it is also a really amazing medicinal herb. It's been used both as an herb in tea, tincture, powder form, and as an essential oil for a very long time now. And it has some interesting properties. It is a warming, stimulating, carminative herb, which means that it helps you digest your food better. It helps with indigestion and bloating and gas. It's a mild astringent, so it helps to tone and tighten tissues. It's a circulatory stimulant with similar properties to cayenne. In fact, they're often used together. It is an antiseptic, at least the oil is. And new research shows that it can help to lower blood sugar. I believe it was James Duke found that taking an eighth of a teaspoon of freshly ground cinnamon could reduce your sensitivity to could increase your sensitivity to insulin by around 20%. So it really is good for that syndrome X, that hyperinsulinemia condition. I use it most frequently as not only a circulatory stimulant and to help flavor certain other formulas, especially digestive formulas, but I think it's really good for bleeding, excessive bleeding. So I use it taken orally for heavy menstrual cycles or for bleeding ulcers. It works really well.
Okay.
So the German Commission E has researched and approves of cinnamon bark for mild gastrointestinal spasms, so what we would think of as mild IBS. And it's also great at stimulating the appetite and relieving indigestion. It has enough tannins in it that it can help to resolve diarrhea, especially in children, and it's easy to get children to take because it tastes so good. And like I said earlier, it helps get rid of this bloating feeling of fullness before you eat or after you eat a small amount. Helps out with nausea and many of the digestive weaknesses that we associate with coldness in the digestive system. Stephen, did you put any uses on here about the essential oils? Because I don't think
the essential oils. I think I might have put a slide in about the essential oils. If I didn't, well, we can talk about it.
Okay. So cinnamon, like I mentioned, helps to increase peripheral circulation, so I think it's really good for people that have Raynaud's disease or spider veins or peripheral artery disease. If you have cold hands and feet and your thyroid is functioning normally, it's a lack of circulation. I think cinnamon is a little bit more mild than cayenne, but it also helps to, I believe, dilate kind of your peripheral blood capillaries, so it helps in a little bit different way than cayenne.
Well, I also think that cayenne is probably one of the strongest stimulants, but it's also short-lived. Right. It peters out quick, like gives you a big bang and then, burns out. Whereas some of the remedies like cinnamon and prickly ash warm, but they warm a little more slowly and taper off a little more slowly too. They get a little more. I think you get a little more sustained effect from them.
I think they're a little deeper. A little bit more slow, but a little bit more thorough, and at a deeper level, you get the warming action.
Right. We're talking about taking this herb internally to stimulate the blood flow into the extremities, not applying it topically, but actually taking it internally. Okay, here's some more uses for cinnamon.
Yeah, it makes a really nice remedy for flus and sore throats. Take a pinch of cayenne pepper and some powdered cinnamon and a little bit of honey, and that honey helps it. And then you just take that straight or in a glass of water. I like taking it straight because then that honey tends to coat and allow that cinnamon's antiseptic effects to really work. The essential oil of cinnamon is very, not just warming, but hot, and should, you should use it very sparingly and try it first before, in very small amounts before you try it in a full drop dose. So I would dilute a drop in a carrier and taste it and see how you react. But most people can stand one drop of cinnamon oil mixed with a little bit of honey. Will totally cause your sinuses to drain and thin out mucus and acts as a really nice expectorant.
By the way, someone asking to go back on the slides. I did post the handouts. There was a little bit of a problem with exporting the handouts. I'm going to try tomorrow when I post the webinar recording to redo the handouts because for some reason in exporting it dropped a little bit of the text, and I'll see if I can't fix that. But you can download the notes and go back over this, and I may put this up in actually a little bigger format too for people. My midwife friend actually taught me a nifty little trick, and that is if you have an earache and you need to relieve it, she would take just a little teeny bit of olive oil and sprinkle a little cinnamon in it and just warm it up gently on the stove, just enough to kind of diffuse the cinnamon into the olive oil, and then she would strain the powder out of that and drop it, warm body temperature into the ears to relieve earaches.
Ooh, that sounds like a really good use.
Very, very good little trick, and it works quite well. So someone said it looks like black and white, but prints in color. I'll have to check that because I put this together in Microsoft Office 2011, and for some reason, when I went to export, I had all kinds of problems. So I'm going to go back and use an older version of Microsoft Office to export these. Okay, Thomas, this is your baby. Take it away. I mean, I love this stuff too, but you put most of this part together. So
yeah, I did it. I had to do a lot of research on chocolate and cacao because honestly I've never really liked the taste of it that much. I've always thought it was too sweet. That's because my family grew up eating milk chocolate, and so doing the research on this and actually munching on some raw cacao nibs has really opened my my perspective up a bit about cacao, which is what we get chocolate from. So cacao was named Theobroma by a guy a long time ago after it was discovered in Central and South America, meaning food of the gods. And it was considered to be almost, even though it was done regularly, it was considered to be almost a spiritual experience among the Aztecs to consume cacao. It was invigorating and it makes you feel good. And as I researched, I learned that not only does it taste good in a Hershey's chocolate bar, but is a very powerful medicine and has a lot of really amazing benefits on the body. So it was so valuable that in Central America during the time of the Aztecs, the small seeds were used as coins for smaller transactions. For things they didn't want to
money.
Use. Yeah, it was used as money. It was so valuable because everybody used it. In 1529, Cortez wrote to the King of Spain and said that he'd found a drink that builds up resistance and fights fatigue. And he brought back trunk loads of cacao beans to Europe when he came back, and the Europeans swept it up and started playing around with it. And if you've ever watched the movie Chocolat, you'll really see some of the interesting history behind all of that. The chocolate was originally, for the Aztecs, never mixed with anything but hot water, and then it was allowed to cool and it was drank cold, and it was sometimes mixed with vanilla, cinnamon, and cayenne. And I was at the health food store today, and Stephen, what's the chocolate company that you really like? Is it Dagobah?
Dagobah.
Dagobah.
Yeah.
Dagobah has a hot chocolate mix that is the same recipe. They just add a little bit of sugar to it, but it's powdered raw cacao mixed with cinnamon and cayenne and vanilla. And I'm really looking forward to giving that a try. The English physicians, well, physicians all over Europe, in fact, when they started using it, found that it really had a lot of great effects. In fact, it was said that not only did it help you sleep and rest, but it kept you awake during the day, and that you could live off of it without taking anything else in, because it was so rich and nourishing to the body. And when we talk about, traditional herbalism, we talk about how the taste of a plant gives you an indication as to how it's used in the body. And raw cacao is mildly bitter, but it's primarily kind of bland and oily. And that bland, oily property in traditional herbalism was thought to signify that it was nourishing, tonifying, building, and maybe a little hormonally active, and we now find that it was. In fact, Stephen, raw cacao kind of reminds me of chewing on maybe a little bit of fresh burdock root, kind of the oily taste and texture you get from burdock.
Right. So it's got a bittersweet flavor with an oily texture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And by the taste alone, we can see that it has such a broad area of use. Okay, next slide. So manuscripts dating from 400 years ago to actually fairly recently reported more than 100 medicinal uses for chocolate. There are 3 consistent uses, however, that can be identified. It was used to treat emaciated patients and help them to gain weight. It was used to stimulate the nervous systems of exhausted or feeble patients. Now, this typically wasn't used for people that had a lot of energy, but it was used kind of as the opposite to what we would use mistletoe. We talked about mistletoe kind of sedating that overactive nervous system. This was used to stimulate an underactive or a feeble nervous system. And it was used to improve digestion and elimination. That oily action helps to stimulate a bit more bile flow from the liver, and the mildly bitter action as well. And then it tends to just build and tonify the kidney and bowel function as well.
Okay.
It was also used for anemia, mental fatigue, poor breast milk production, tuberculosis, although I think that they used almost anything they could find for tuberculosis. It was an interesting disease as far as the variety of remedies for that. It's used for fever, gout, kidney stones, low virility, and that was just the cacao beans. In addition, the bark or the oil, the butter from the plant and the leaves have also been used for burns, bowel dysfunctions, cuts, and skin irritations.
Cocoa butter is a wonderful addition for salves, for healing ointments. It's just a phenomenal and soothing oil, isn't it? Have you? Yeah.
And smells good.
Oh, it does smell good too.
So America's founding fathers were so captivated by chocolate that Thomas Jefferson is quoted as saying, "The superiority of chocolate both for health and nourishment will soon give it the preference over tea and coffee in America, which it has in Spain." And the founder of Hershey's Chocolate Company, Milton Hershey, knew full well the value of chocolate, and one of his early slogans was "Hershey's, more sustaining than meat." And he thought that it could be used in place of meat because it kept you going and kept you feeling so good.
Actually, it's really interesting because basically I read the biography of Hershey and the company and how he developed it and all the stuff he went through, and it was marketed as a health food. I mean, literally, that was the initial thing. This is like so, nourishing and sustaining and healthy for you. So,
well, that's kind of like, John Kellogg establishing Kellogg cereals as the health cereals or the health foods of the day, and now we have Tony's Frosted Flakes.
yes, exactly. So the real problem is what we have here at the bottom is the amount of sugar and milk that eventually got added to the chocolate. I've always maintained that the biggest problem with chocolate is the added sugar. I mean,
Yeah, absolutely. And
I mean,
I think we're going to see a slide that kind of gives you a kind of what to look for. If you go for the higher percent, oh well, we've got more information on chocolate.
yeah, we got more information.
Okay, so Stephen, you want to talk about antioxidants in cacao for a second?
Well, the interesting thing about chocolate, it's actually been shown to have one of the highest ORAC values of any food out there. So there are phenols, large class of molecules found in fruits and vegetables like oranges, soybeans, and berries. But they're very beneficial, similar to red grapes and tea, with the highly touted antioxidant benefits of those two. But its antioxidants are very, very concentrated. So more than 10% of the weight of the dry cacao beans is polyphenols. Right? That's amazing. I know that people take the polyphenols from green tea and concentrate them to extract them to use them medicinally. Here they're already pretty concentrated. So that's great. This is something that just has really fascinated me as I've learned about the cacao has a really big mood altering effect. It stimulates endorphins. It stimulates serotonin. It probably has a little bit of an effect on dopamine and oxytocin and some of the chemicals in your brain that actually make you feel good. And there's some evidence to show that this are some of the same neurotransmitters that give us that euphoric feeling when we're in love, or when we have an orgasm during sex. So this could explain why chocolate has become such a food of love, as a gift of love, almost like an aphrodisiac, and also why many women suffering from PMS crave chocolate, because it's going to enhance their brain chemicals, particularly serotonin, and boost and improve mood. Like I say, the biggest problem is the addition of all of the sugar that's been added to it. Thomas, do you want to talk about this one?
Yeah. So researchers have compared the blood pressure lowering effects of cacao versus tea, and they found that eating cacao-rich foods was associated with an average 4.7 point lower systolic blood pressure and a 2.8 lower diastolic blood pressure, which is not significant, but at least we know that it's not raising the blood pressure. And the studies show that that was with eating about 3.5 ounces of dark chocolate, which seems to be kind of the maximum dose you want to do. It seems like that the eating more doesn't help. You're going to get the max therapeutic value out of chocolate with about 3.5 ounces, which is,
I actually read a study that people who eat a little bit of a little candy, probably particularly chocolate, periodically, actually live longer than people who don't eat any candy at all.
Yeah,
absolutely. And I think that has to do with some of the mood-enhancing effects of this. It's funny because when I got into the health food movement, the big thing was carob. Carob was healthier than chocolate. And I could never get into the carob thing. And when I read a little bit about it, and found out that chocolate had been the food of the gods to the Aztecs and used as a medicinal plant and all that kind of stuff. And then I found that in Hebrew culture, carob pods were considered to be pig food, poor man's food, something that you ate when you were like, had nothing else to eat. And they're a legume, okay, to boot. I always said, which do you want, pig food or the food of the gods? And I'll take the food of the gods any day. So I'm really glad to see all the research on chocolate. Now, this is really interesting stuff. Tell us about your thing about the difference between theobromine and caffeine.
Okay, so theobromine and caffeine are very closely related. They have just one or two little molecules different. In fact, it's theorized that the coffee plant and the cacao plant were the same plant until Pangaea split in two. So they say, millions of years ago, the entire world was one big continent called Pangaea, and it split in two, and cacao evolved to have theobromine in it, and the coffee plant evolved to have caffeine in it. And the effects are similar, but they have some pretty marked differences in them. Theobromine tends to be gentle with a very slow onset, whereas caffeine tends to be more intense and fast-acting. Theobromine tends to last longer. It stays in your bloodstream. 50% of it's still in your bloodstream after 6 to 10 hours, whereas coffee, 50% is in the bloodstream after 2 to 5 hours, so much faster action with caffeine. Theobromine makes you feel good, makes you feel happy, whereas caffeine increases alertness. Theobromine is an antidepressant. Caffeine can stimulate emotional stress and anxiety.
Now, I want to make a comment on that because I have never, my whole life I avoided caffeine, because the way I was raised and everything. This last year, when I was under a lot of stress and I was tired sometimes, I actually tried using some coffee, to get my energy up. And I found that actually it made me have more problems with insomnia, feel more stressed, more anxious, and it friggin' wasn't worth it. Okay? I read in one of Dr. Amen's books that the problem with caffeine is it interferes with the breakdown of the chemicals that cause anxiety. So yeah, it may stimulate some energy, but it's also going to increase your anxiety and your feeling of stress, which is going to make it more difficult for you to sleep. So I just have been avoiding this stuff like crazy and been feeling tons better, but I don't get that problem with chocolate. I can use chocolate to give me a little bit of energy because I'm cacao, but it does not have that effect of causing the anxiety. So just a comment on what you're saying.
Yeah. Theobromine is typically not addictive. You don't have withdrawal symptoms if you come off of chocolate, but you do if you come off of caffeine. If you're eating chocolate every day and you stop, you're going to miss it maybe because it tastes good and makes you feel good, but you're not going to have physical symptoms. Whereas if you're drinking several cups of coffee a day, you're going to have physical withdrawal symptoms from that caffeine. You're going to have headaches. So, and besides that, caffeine is also a pretty strong diuretic, and theobromine is very mild. One of my, I like modern fiction literature, and one of my favorite ways that plants are used in that is in the Harry Potter series. And in the Harry Potter series, there's a group of creatures called Dementors, and they suck the life out of you so that you feel like you'll never feel happiness again. And the remedy for a Dementor attack in the Harry Potter book is chocolate. And I feel like that use just really crosses over well. I think that it's really good to help pick you up, stimulate you, make you feel like that life is good, that there's hope and joy and happiness left. So that's just one of my nerdy afterthoughts there.
That's fine. You're entitled to them. Here's the next slide on that you put up. So,
yeah, once more, caffeine's bad. Theobromine is good, basically. In studies, large quantities of caffeine have showed to decrease sperm count. Well-controlled studies have showed that about 2% of miscarriages could be due to caffeine and coffee, and caffeine is going to typically cause more dehydration than chocolate.
You know, it's funny because we're talking about this, and I have this um, extract. You know, my friends are playing with a process that creates a 16-to-1 glycerin extract. You know, 1 pound of plant makes 16 pounds of extract, and it's amazingly concentrated for getting that much out of it. But they gave me a glycerin extract of cacao, and it's phenomenal. And we actually put like a small amount of green coffee bean extract in it, some licorice and some cayenne, and they're sending me a new one with vanilla in it, which I'm looking forward to trying. But I got to tell them to add some cinnamon, don't you think? I mean,
Absolutely.
I think, but it actually is a very nice, smooth, like pickup. We're trying to experiment with the formula and make an energy formula based on chocolate, which I think is really cool. All right,
Nice.
so, and nutrition. Um,
Yeah, you know, cacao has some vitamins and minerals, but it's most used for its mineral content. Has some vitamins. It's most used for its mineral content. It has 3 ounces of 80% cacao, so your typical dark chocolate bar has got 230 milligrams of magnesium. It contains potassium, contains zinc, copper, manganese, which is a really important one that's very lacking in most diets.
very important for a female reproductive system. Yeah.
Contains small amounts of selenium, iron, so that's, you know, we saw earlier that it was used for anemia. So, yeah, it's very nutritious and high in a lot of good minerals.
Okay. So someone asked the question about what percentage of chocolate is considered dark. So you're going to answer that right now, right?
Yeah. You should always aim for at least 70% cacao content. So it's got to be at least 70%. I prefer 80%. In fact, you know, I had somebody that needed a pick-me-up and didn't want to, you know, mess up their diet, but thought that they could really stick with their diet easier if they could get some chocolate in. And so I looked through the chocolate bars, and I found one that had 80%. And Stephen and I used this rule when, or this way to tell if you're getting too much sugar in, and you basically take your total carbohydrates and you subtract your fiber and half of your fats. And if that number is below 10, then it's typically not going to cause an insulin response and won't be that bad for you. And we looked at these chocolate bars, and all of the ones that were 80% cacao had, you know, maybe 15 grams of carbohydrates, but they had 30 grams of fat in them, which lowers your glycemic load to well within good ranges. So go with at least 70, if not 80% cacao. No more than 3 ounces a day, and try the raw cacao nibs. They're really not bad. I won't say that they're really that good, but if you need a little pick-me-up, they're actually pretty fun to crunch on. And they contain a special kind of fat that helps your body burn fat better.
Yeah. And as for the cocoa powder, that's just basically powdered cocoa. So
Powdered cacao nibs, yeah.
Cacao nibs. So basically, I love to make stuff with chocolate, and you know, not using any refined sugar in it, or make hot chocolate with some little xylitol to sweeten it, or something like that. I make these. My favorite cookie is a triple chocolate cookie, which is basically a chocolate cookie with chocolate and with dark and white chocolate chips. So I adore chocolate myself. Oh, someone mentioned that chocolate melts at 98.6 degrees our body temperature. That's cool too. Okay, here are some things that you put in.
Yeah, we put in a couple of recipes. You know, for a quick chocolate fix, you can take about a teaspoon of cocoa powder and mix it with yogurt and a little bit of sliced fruit, or add some cocoa powder to some almond milk, with a little bit of frozen yogurt, and I like adding some honey to that. You can brew up a chocolate coffee substitute, so you'll get the stimulating effect of theobromine and kind of the taste of coffee, not quite the taste, but still pretty good, using coarsely ground cacao beans, and you would use about the same amount as you would coffee and put it in a drip coffee maker, and it makes a mildly bitter beverage that's a bit richer and really nice tasting replacement for modern coffee.
And this one, a recipe for hot chocolate.
Yeah, this is a hot chocolate recipe based on the traditional Aztec drink. So you're going to take a quarter cup of unsweetened cocoa powder and a little bit of granulated, unrefined raw sugar, about a half a teaspoon of cinnamon, a little dash of salt, and then you take a combination of milk and half, and a little bit of vanilla, and a pinch of cayenne, and I did some research, took a few different recipes and tried them, and this is really an excellent, excellent drink. I think I might be addicted already.
Well, I might mention I'm working out to get something that I make for myself into an actual recipe where other people can follow the directions. But I take a jar of almond butter, add a little bit of raw honey to it to sweeten it a little bit. Throw in some nuts like walnuts or raisins or dried fruit, and then I put in some cocoa powder. And someone asked, is there a difference between cocoa powder and cacao? Cacao is basically the Latin name for cocoa. And basically put in enough of that and a little bit of the protein powder to get it to kind of dry out enough that I can press it into a tray, put it in the fridge, let it harden up, and that makes my own energy bars.
Nice.
And they taste really good, and I think they're pretty nutritious too, and they've got just that little bit of taste of the cocoa powder in there that not a lot. But I make them all the time, but I haven't really kept track of how much I add, so I'm trying to make a couple batches and test the proportions till I get it down right, so I can post on my website how I make some of my own energy bars. Astringent, I don't really see it as an herb that's so specific to contributing to sweating. It's sort of like sage. Sage is an aromatic, but it's also a little bit astringent, and it's actually used to relieve excess sweating. Do you use cinnamon for warming the hands internally or externally? Internally. Are spider veins a sign of not enough circulation or too much circulation?
Not enough.
Not enough, and also a lack of tone in blood vessels, which is where that astringent effect comes in too. Is vanilla okay for blood type O, or should it be limited? Here's the thing. Thomas, you sent that link to that thing about the blood type O, the blood type diet thing. I have felt for a long time that okay, I think while I really can see the points that guy made in the article, I do notice, for example, that a lot of A blood types like me don't handle eating red meat as well as, say, O's do. But to me, too many people take that as kind of almost like a religion, and especially when it comes to herbs. I don't think that you're eating any herbs in any large enough quantities for it to make that much difference. Mostly what you're trying to eliminate is major food allergens that are not compatible with your body, and looking at some of those in the blood type diet might be okay, but honestly I think that even Kim, who's studied it extensively, says that you can eat up to 30% avoids and it's not going to affect you at all unless you have some kind of serious autoimmune condition. So I wouldn't worry about things like that. Have I purchased Van Hoyten Cacao, a product of Holland? No, I have not. What would you recommend
just the name makes it sound good, though.
Yes, it does. What would you recommend for strep throat, sinus infection, and bronchitis? Well, that's a lot big. We covered a lot of remedies that could work on strep throat, sinus infections, and bronchitis tonight. I mean, one of the things about that is people think that herbs relate to conditions, and herbs relate more to people. So really, this is where we're doing a free preview webinar for our Advanced Herbal Training Program, which if you go to treelight.com, you'll see the registration for the free preview where we're going to talk about energetics. But you really need to look at, okay, what's the energetic of the person involved who has these problems? You want to explain that a little, Thomas, or do you want me to?
Yeah, to give you an example, golden seal is commonly used as an anti-infective agent, but it's a cooling, bitter remedy. And so if you use it on an infection that has settled in and is cold, it's not going to work as well, if at all. You would use a more stimulating, warming remedy if, the infection has settled in and is cold. And, so when you're talking about strep throat, there are 50 herbs that come to mind that could be beneficial. Same thing with sinusitis and pneumonia or bronchitis. But the question is, what does the person need, And the way that you help to figure that out is taking a look at the tongue and taking the pulse and looking at the general coloring and, a lot of different things that we'll be talking about in this advanced herb modules to help you narrow down which herb is good. So you take those 50 anti-infective herbs and then you say, okay, well, the person has a pale, heavily coated tongue, so you want to use a warming, bitter herb to help counteract the mucus indicated by the heavier coating and the clogged lymphatics indicated by the heavier coating on the tongue, and something to warm the body indicated by the paler color of the tongue. And then you take the pulse and you find out that it's really wiry, and so you realize that you might want to add something that's a little relaxing in there to help balance that out. So that's, when you say what herb do you use, we could give you 50 to sample, but it would you would have to have a bit more knowledge of the body's processes and the properties of the herbs to find a really nice custom formula for that person. I do want to emphasize, though, since you mentioned strep throat, if it's diagnosed strep throat, I typically recommend that people take a short course of antibiotics, because about 10% of the time strep throat can settle into other parts of the body, or the bacteria can, and cause serious problems. So don't mess around with strep throat.
And for Google, you don't actually burn and breathe it. Google is actually a remedy you take internally, typically in capsules. And can it be used as a replacement for the drug Plavix? I'm not familiar with the drug Plavix. Are you, Thomas? And I don't think any herb can be used as a replacement for a drug.
Yeah, Plavix is an antiplatelet medication that's used typically after people have had stents or heart surgery, and they're wanting to keep the blood from clogging and clotting over a stent or a bypass area. And as far as Google, could it be used for that? I would not use Google for that, but I don't use Google that often, so it might be used for a platelet condition, but I would think more along the lines of vitamin E and fish oils and ginkgo and garlic and things like that instead.
Yeah. Can myrrh and frankincense be made into someone with gangrene when the doctor says infection in the blood and they want to amputate the foot? One time I had someone ask me about that, and we actually helped the person save the foot from not being amputated by taking herbs to enhance circulation internally, which, you can pick a variety of some. We've talked about some possible remedies there. But what I also had them do is alternate once or twice a day, alternate hot and cold foot soaks. Basically, you make a nice warm tea, throw a little bit of pinch of cayenne or some stimulating herbs in it, then make a cold foot bath, and you stick your feet in the cold foot bath until they get cold, and then stick them over into the warm foot bath until they warm up, and then stick them back in the cold foot bath and alternate back and forth for 15-20 minutes. That helps stimulate circulation to that area. But that's one strategy for that, but that might not be enough. You have to, again, some of these things you'd have to really look at the case history and so forth. Is the nerve firing in the brain like the nerve firing in the mouth called trigeminal neuralgia? Where can we get mistletoe? We already talked about the fact that mistletoe is a professional herb, and you can get a little bit of it in the circulatory formula from herbalists and alchemists, but as a single herb, you'd have to talk to a professional herbalist like Thomas Easley. Do you have any comments on trigeminal neuralgia, Thomas?
I could be wrong, but I actually think I remember the literature talking about that specific condition with mistletoe, so it's something that I would definitely give a shot.
Yeah. I'm European. I'm wondering on the exact herbs to use. We gave you the species name of the mistletoe, and so what you want to do is go by the scientific name when you're looking for something like that. Can you use the mistletoe on a puppy that's on phenobarbital for seizures? I don't know. Never tried it, so that's one I don't know.
No idea.
Someone says St. Vitus dance, not epilepsy, related to rheumatic fever, usually passes after illness, treated in 6 months. Jerky movement. So someone's making a comment about what surveyed. Wow, there are a lot of people on this webinar who are still asking questions. How long do you want to keep going, Thomas?
Well, let's go for another 10 minutes.
Let's go for another 10 minutes and try to answer them as many as we can. Okay. Okay. Please explain the cost again. It will be the cost will be for each 5-webinar module will be regularly $157, or if you're a member of Treelight member program, which is $19.95 a month, you'd save $30, which is you'd get it for $127. But on the first module only, as an introduction to the course, we're giving people an additional $30 off if they register by January 3rd. So if you go online and register right now before January 3rd, you'll get an additional $30 off. All of the other modules will be $157 or $127. Okay. And let's see, burdock for cysts. Burdock is actually one of the better herbs, in my opinion, for cysts. So I think that is a good suggestion. And someone also mentioned that Tigo helped them get rid of a ganglion cyst. So whoever asked the question about ganglion cysts, someone said that Tigo was helpful. Okay, is the Advanced Herbal Training Program similar to the CNHP? Absolutely not. We are going to do some serious in-depth training. I mean, serious stuff. This is not like like 5 little courses or something like that. We're going to be actually developing this program over a course of 2 years. It will probably take us 18 months just to go through the herbs. I mean, we're talking about that kind of in-depth training. So that we're talking probably about doing at least 9 webinars where we're going to be just talking about medicinal plants in depth. And we may extend that, and each one of these modules will be able to be purchased separately. And then, like Thomas said, we're going to be doing, you know, a little bit about some in-depth anatomy, pathology, looking at some plant chemistry probably, and some other things like that. Okay, more clarification on the mistletoe. Mistletoe is not an essential oil. Mistletoe is not a flower essence. Mistletoe is a medicinal plant, and it is done in a tincture form, and it's taken orally in doses of 20 to 40 drops. So that's how mistletoe is typically taken. For young children who bloat after eating, would applying cinnamon oil directly to the tummy area be helpful, or would they need to swallow it? I would not recommend applying cinnamon oil to the stomach of an infant, young child. It is way too hot. Peppermint oil would probably be a good choice for a young kid. Thomas, are you there?
Yep.
You know, that's something like peppermint oil or peppermint tea or something like that, right?
Yeah, or maybe even depending on if they're over 2 years old, maybe an ounce or two of hot water with a little bit of cinnamon and a dash of honey in it before every meal.
Someone says that they've heard that the only true cinnamon is from Thailand, and the others are not good for you. I can't remember where I can't remember where the true cinnamon is from, but all of the cinnamons actually have some good beneficial qualities. Thomas stated that he used cinnamon for reducing heavy menses. Is there a standard dose? I have used shepherd's purse to stop heavy menses, and I think it's a nice alternative. So what did you say about using cinnamon oil with heavy menses?
I use cinnamon. I use a tincture of cinnamon in combination with shepherd's purse and tianqian ginseng to help out with menstrual flow, and I use equal parts of cinnamon, tianqian ginseng, and shepherd's purse, and my dose is 40 to 60 drops 4 or 5 times a day, and it typically works within a day.
So that is a tincture made of equal parts of those 3 herbs, and I know that the tianqian ginseng is a famous remedy in China for stopping bleeding. So, okay. Okay, let's see. Saved a lady's foot from being amputated by large amounts of gray pine and applying Silver Shield topically. Sounds like a good plan. Puppies are like children in many respects when it comes to herbs, so I would be very careful using mistletoe, someone says. Yes. Can overseas people enroll in it? Absolutely. Our program is being taught by internet, so anybody, anywhere can do it. And we record all sessions. All sessions are posted to your class page that all of the people who've enrolled in the course have access to. So even if you can't make the live class, you'd still be able to download the sessions, download the notes, the handouts, the study materials, and take the course that way. With the courses, will you have a manual or just these PDF files? We will not have a manual. We will have the PDF handouts. We may have some additional handouts we produce with the class, but there won't be a formal manual with these programs. Okay, Thomas, I think we've about used up our time.
Stephen, this has been fun.
It has been fun, and I'm sorry we can't get to everybody's questions. I mean, we could probably go on and on answering questions for a long time. But
yeah, save them for the January 4th free preview of the next class.
Right, and bring them up then, and we'll try to answer your questions. But we are giving you a kind of an idea of the kind of material we're going to be talking about in these classes. So you have a Merry Christmas, everyone. Thank you so much for participating in our webinar tonight, and we'll talk to you again, hopefully, on a future class.
Happy solstice.